What's the next thing that's going to make it easier to write code?
Where to go to learn citizen development if you're a non-developer person?
Create games inside Minecraft using blocks. It's very much like building a low-code application. I love that the Power Platform has got such extensibility.
So by the way, about the Ribbon Workbench, are you still investing your time in it? Will low-code take us to a place where developers will be irrelevant?
It's best to learn from our mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, you don't really learn.
Hi, my name is Sarov, and you're watching the Sarov Plus channel. Our guest today is Scott Durow. Scott is a well-known Microsoft Dynamics 365 and Power Platform expert. If you've ever used Ribbon Workbench or checked out the first ever game created for Canvas, the person behind all this is our guest today. Scott frequently speaks at the most prominent Microsoft conferences, has been a business application MVP since 2013. Wow, almost a decade. In the interview, you will learn about Scott's personal development environment setup and how he approaches new development projects. Also, you will hear what the future holds for pro developers. Citizen developers will learn the best and quickest way to start a career on the platform. Ready? Let's roll. Hi, Scott. Nice to see you. I'm super glad to meet you on our podcast. How do you do?
Yeah, it's great. Thank you very much for inviting me, Vlad. It's great to see you as well.
I know we're coming off the heels of a couple of big conferences and actually the Airlift going on. I don't think we can talk about Airlift openly, or we can mention that there is such a conference. But what do you think about all the conferences that we at the end of the season? So what's your take?
The Power Platform conference in Orlando was really the highlight of my year, I think. When you've been away for so long, being able to come back together, and even if you're all crammed into a room where there's not enough seating, or where you have to wait in a line to get your lunch, all those kind of things, no one really worried.
It was super packed, no ventilation, no masks, and people don't care at all.
I think a lot of conferences probably will go on being hybrid, having maybe live streams or maybe having things recorded in a much more professional way than just somebody having some random camera,
What I want to ask you about the events and conferences, you are one of the people who actually one of the guru of conferences. So first of all, question to you, which event you find usable yourself as a guest, as an audience member, and what type of events you suggest people need to attend?
Always, every single event that I've ever been to, I have always taken something away. And so every time I go to an event, I try to attend as many possible sessions as I can. Yeah, I always come away with something like, oh, I didn't know it could do that. And I especially love hearing scenarios, real customer experience, where people have actually done something and they come away with lessons learned.
Where to go to learn citizen development if you're a non-developer person?
My advice would be the same, actually, whether or not you are a citizen developer, a non-tech person. My advice would always be look at examples of code that other people have written. That is where you can learn not only how-tos, but also the whys and the whens and the whos, all of those other things. And so you're building on other people's work, and then you're benefiting from that. And there's lots of places you can go to get that. I mean, even if you want to learn about low code, I did a video on looking at the Teams apps.
Yeah, that's our mutual friend Steve Mordew. I'm always impressed the things he can put together. And he always saying, if I cannot find an answer in the documentation somewhere, I'm looking for some MVP or some video thing, and I just take it from there, just replicate, and it works. And I don't care why.
You find out why. I mean, you eventually, you do. You use it enough, and you eventually go, oh yeah, I get this now. If you're like me, once you get to a certain level, you kind of just understand. You understand the theory, and then you've tried out the samples, the little bit of code that they have in the books or the Microsoft Learn documentation, but it only gets you so far. As soon as you look into actually more complex stuff for how people have done, that's when the light bulbs go off and you go, I see, they've used that there and that there, and now it kind of makes more sense.
And I want to switch gears now into low code. I've noticed that low code starting coming more and more since you moved to Canada. Was it Canada affecting you? So UK didn't help that much. And one of our producers, he was shaking and he was saying, so Scott, where is he? Is he in Britain? He's in British Columbia. So what's going on? I was thinking maybe you just missed the ticket. Maybe the wrong ticket was bought. So how Canada helped you? How it contributed to what you do today? Is it different to UK?
It's interesting you point that out, because now you come to mention it. I would think it's more of a coincidence than anything.
Pro-citizen movement moved you to citizen development.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that, as I was saying earlier, with technology you can't stay still, right? It's always about a changing landscape. What's the next thing that's going to make it easier to write code? Low code is the next step in that evolution. Is another tool that we have. It's not like, just because we've got C#, that doesn't mean to say we don't use C++. Low code is just another tool that we have, and we can benefit from that tool, whether or not we are a citizen developer. Development is not our job. We're just using low code tools to augment our job and make it easier. And maybe we love it so much that we want to change career and move into that more. It's really having ability to build applications in your job and use that as a tool. I think that is fantastic.
When we're preparing for this session, our producers, I mentioned to them, you have 3 kids and all of them adults. So they will be actually huge adopters of low code. They will be native. Do you see your kids, your children becoming Power Platform developers, whatever? I don't know how it will be called in 5-10 years. How do you see it?
Well, yeah, all 3 of my kids are very, very different. My oldest is nearly 20. He's studying biology at university, and my youngest is 16, and she's like, sorry, my daughter is 16. My youngest is 14.
Doesn't matter. Just forgot what's the age for your kids. It's not a big deal, I guess.
Yeah, no, I do it all the time. Even that age span, right? From the oldest to the youngest is huge in terms of how technology has come on with things like Minecraft. You can program Minecraft to do things, and my youngest does that. Uses Minecraft worlds and create games inside Minecraft using blocks. It's very much like building a low code application. You build put these blocks together, and there's like loops and variables, and so you're right, absolutely. For them, it is just part of the world today.
What kind of biggest, I don't want to use rude words, but what was the main challenge or the main mistake learning experience Scott Durow had?
Oh, goodness me. I could tell you some stories. I really could do. One of my hobbies is collecting stories about how things went wrong. And I know that sounds very negative. It's best to learn from our mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, you don't really learn. If you can learn from other people's mistakes, I think that's the best of both worlds, isn't it? The thing about software is that I came to realize very early on, it's always only going to be as good as you test. The way that you make sure that you don't get a situation where something's going to go wrong is to make sure you've thought about all the scenarios that can possibly break it. I've deployed something into production, and then it's like, well, we didn't really think about somebody doing that. I learned that lesson very early on because I worked in industrial control system. So those user interfaces are being run by somebody who typically will have, maybe some really uncomfortable breathing apparatus on, so gloves. They'll be hot and sweaty, and they're just going to be frustrated. And the way that someone interacting with your software is going to be so different from the way that I was working on the software, sat down in front of a computer. And really the only way that I could experience that is actually putting myself into that situation, observing people and seeing how they work. So if I'm designing a mobile app, a power app that's working on a mobile, I'll try and say, well, okay, let me use this for a month and see what I feel like at the end of that month.
We developers usually think that we know it all, how the end user can help us, or definitely going and watching people. So you mentioned how you start. Oh, you want to say something?
If I was to give anybody some advice from a technology, from an implementation, if you're coding something, it would always be look at the actual real data that you're going to be using. Start with that early as possible. Start with the kind of environment that you're going to be having in production right from the beginning, because it's a lot easier to plan for the worst case scenario from day one than start off with the simplest case, then get all the way through and then realize you've got to now, make it more optimized or more, you quite often will rule out things early on. If you know that you have to be dealing with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of records, if you're doing kind of an update to some data, and you'll realize that this is just going to take so long that you can't possibly do it in the amount of time that you've got in a day, that kind of stuff.
I think that's what you're referring to, old joke, which every single customer hates when developer comes say it works on my laptop. I don't know what's going on with your machine. It works for me.
Yes, exactly.
First time I ever been to Canada, actually 3 months ago. I've been to Toronto area. And I was so puzzled to see, I crossed the Buffalo area from US, and I felt like I came to France.
Yes.
So European, even prices were in liters, and it was gallons like everywhere else. And it felt like France, it felt like Europe, and I could understand. Do you feel the same kind of vibe in Canada, that's kind of European more?
Well, it's so large that it's so varied. I mean, in the West, less French influence. On the right, on the other side, with Quebec, there's a lot more French. So it's very varied depending on where you are. It's nice to be in a culture that has got integration between those two sides.
So I have a provocative question. Will you go back to UK if something changes, or found your place to stay like for life?
We're here specifically because my wife grew up here, so we sort of moved here to be closer to our parents. And they say you generally go where your kids go, right? So who knows? I would say, if they end up going back to the UK, then probably we would follow. But
do they miss on the UK, or they like new place?
They seem to like it here, but there's some things they miss from back home, as I think as we all do.
And developers, they probably would ask, how do you approach your development? And no, as a sample, to remind you something useful, do you remember your Lemmings game?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So using Lemmings game you built, so how did you approach? Did you just jump into the code and start building stuff? So how did it play out? How do you usually approach this kind of more sophisticated development, not just small plugin?
I mean, I do like playing games. It's just I don't have the time to get into these things. Sometimes I play things like Star Wars on the Xbox with my kids. I'm not very good at using an Xbox controller. I'm much better with a keyboard. And they shame me into not being able to use the thing.
Like you need to have like different hands for your Xbox. It's not normal fingers.
Yeah. I've had a fascination with the kind of efforts that needed to create large scale productions like films and like animation films, but also video games, right? If you look at the credits on a video game, a huge number of people. And I'm always been fascinated right since I've been started working in software, is like, how do you divide the efforts between all these different people? But if you look at something, a game like Lemmings, that goes back to the days where one person could have an idea for a game and do the graphics for the game and code the game, or maybe a couple of people. It was a very, very, very small team. So the team dynamics to do that are very, very different to the kind of team dynamics to create a large game like, the big blockbusters you get today. Now, and I think that's a very good analogy to the different mindsets. So when I'm looking at software architecture and looking at teams working together to build a solution, I think of it much, much more about building these big blockbuster games. It's like you've got many, many different challenges of different disciplines. Whereas if you're building something like Lemmings, which I did, is much more, it's like, okay, well, I've got a very, very specific set of design challenges I need to solve. The number of challenges is much, much slower and smaller. So the way I approach those kind of things is in a much more, traditional, you sit down and you say, okay, well, how am I going to get a sprite moving around the screen? Now, I did a YouTube video on my thought process, which maybe you could link to.
That's actually super useful for building on top of Canvas technology.
If you're programming on any technology, it's like any programming language, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, okay, I know I've got this element sprite, so that I need to move around. I need to make them move around quickly, right? So especially in Lemmings, I need to be able to have hundreds of these things moving around. So you're dividing up your system into components, into sub-components. Then you can then solve those sub-component challenges in isolation from each other and then gradually build them up together. And so although it's a much smaller challenge, again, it's still very much the same approach. It's like, how do I subdivide a complex system into smaller elements? It's just the only difference is that in a large implementation, those smaller elements may be dealt with whole teams, separate teams, whereas in a small implementation, those smaller elements can be dealt with maybe by the same person.
So talking for guys who are extremely professional developers, how Scott Durow approaches, how he starts his development day. So what kind of tool set do you use? How your work looks like? What was the last time you were developing something? Was it today? Was it yesterday? Was it last year?
Oh, I'm always developing things. Sometimes I find myself, going to get a coffee and I'll suddenly stop and I unconsciously will start to develop something in my head. I'm like working through scenarios and things. And my brain sometimes hijacks me because it will go off on one kind of thread and start to run through all these scenarios. And it's as much as a blessing as it is a curse, to be honest, because I'm always thinking about alternative scenarios, worst case scenarios. So although my job is really a solution architect, thinking about, the overall design of the solution, I'm really a big believer in being able to actually understand and build things at a much lower level in order to understand the overall solution architecture. There are many, many different moving parts, many different things to a piece of to a software, and especially in the Power Platform. Now, you can't be an expert in everything in the Power Platform anymore. I mean,
you could 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. There was a time where you could really understand how, but really there's just so many different things now.
I'll try to narrow down and talk nitty detail. So what kind of tools do you have? Do you open a Visual Studio? So can you tell us how your work process looks like when you start building something?
Yeah, so I use Visual Studio, yeah, definitely, and I use VS Code. These days, probably VS Code more than Visual Studio. I've got a laptop, Quad Xeon, 32 gig, sounds like a jet engine taking off.
You don't bring it to conferences when you go there, right? So you don't bring it with you, I guess.
Well, it's surprisingly light, actually. No, absolutely. It's surprisingly light. Yeah, so I do lug it around. I mean, I have considered having a sort of like a tower desktop machine, and I don't like necessarily having a machine that is so powerful that it can do...
Playing games.
Yeah, exactly. I don't play games on my laptop, and generally a lot of work we're doing these days is in Azure anyway, or in the cloud. So I find that I've got enough processing power in that to do builds, building stuff and testing things in browser, and have enough software open that it doesn't crash with memory and things like that. And sometimes it's nice to have limitations on your desktop, because then it stops you being inefficient and stops you creating things that are not going to run performant in an environment where someone's got a normal average machine.
So we just learned Scott is not playing games. One of big takeaways to be an announcement. Scott is not playing games. What do you do when you uncover real, almost showstoppers, real roadblocks you cannot get over, and it's technology is not there, Microsoft thing is not working properly? I know you have MVP channel, but what would you advise professional pro developer who's getting into those roadblocks and they can find really a workaround?
Well, I think roadblocks are things that you want to know about as early as you possibly can. So it goes back to my sort of pessimistic thinking on designs of systems. As I immediately start with the attitude as you can't do this. I need to prove to myself, right, that I can.
You're definitely not a salesman, because if you're selling IT, everything is doable tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in many pre-sales meetings where, someone's kicked me under the table because I'm yes, don't stop being too honest, because it's very easy to say, oh, of course we can do that. If you're a software architect, you have to take this defensive stance. Even though you may be doing a solution architecture, you have to really be able to get down to the architecturally significant design decision. These are the things that will make or break a piece of software, and typically architecturally significant stuff linked to significant requirements. So architecturally significant business requirements. For example, the business requirement is you need to be able to display 100 lemmings on the screen, move across a land in a pixel perfect way, moving up and down and without any kind of flicker. You need to prove that you can possibly do that with some margin for error, right? You need to show that it's not going to be pushing the boundaries of the system. Because if you do find that you're pushing the boundary of the system early, you want to find that on the first iteration, the first couple of weeks, right? And if you find that it's pushing the boundaries and you go, oh, we can't squeeze any, I was talking about a game loop, right? If you can't squeeze any more post-processing into that game loop, then, well, you know what? It's probably not the right technology to be using. And you have to be honest. I love that the Power Platform has got such extensibility. I think that the Power Platform, Power Apps, has got more extensibility than any of the competitor low-code technologies, just simply because it enables you to create components that are reusable in the sense that you can create them using pro code, you can write them in TypeScript, but then you or a custom connector, using C#, and then you can then reuse that in a low-code way. So you're creating building blocks, look no different to the standard out-of-the-box functionality, which then you can still keep on using in low-code. So it's not like suddenly you get into pro code, you're always going to be in pro code. So yeah, it's very much a case of proving out what you're trying to achieve early on so that there's no surprises. And if there's ever any motto that I have, it's no surprises.
So if you still land on some surprises, do you go to product team?
If I believe that there is something that is not working as it should do, and it's clearly documented as working like it should be working as X and it's actually working as Y, I would always recommend Microsoft support, because Microsoft support are very, very good at saying, oh yes, the documentation says this, it's clearly doing that. I mean, obviously as an MVP, I'm very privileged in, as you know, being able to get connection with the product team, but still, I don't like using that as some kind of overusing that privilege. I want to be able to go through Microsoft support, get a ticket number, and if that ticket is not progressing, well, okay, maybe then I can escalate it through some other channels. But typically, if the challenge that I have is like, okay, well, it's not doing what I want it to do. I want it to be able to display 200 Lemmings, but it's not. Well, that's a different matter, right? I can want it all I like. The fact of the matter is that it can't do that. There's no amount of whining and crying that I can do to make it change it, because it's suddenly not going to be re-engineered over the night. Suddenly the product team's not going to go, oh, well, I'll go and make Scott enable him to do that.
Yeah, you can't really go and complain, my Lemmings are not crossing the land. What's going on, guys? Go and fix it.
Sorry, my dog.
Scott has a dog as well. That's another thing we have discovered.
I think he's barking at some Canadian geese that have just landed on the front lawn.
Okay.
We have these huge Canadian geese that kind of come in at this time. They're migrating south.
For pro code developers, I actually believe the pro developers, the main beneficiaries of low code systems. I don't know what's your take. It actually saves a lot of time in complexity on performance testing. Actually, testing itself becomes not such an issue. But I know a lot of pro developers are actually pushing back, and they don't like. They actually see a competition. So what's going on? Will low code take us to a place where developers will be irrelevant?
I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think it's ever going to be a situation where developers are irrelevant. If you're a pro developer today and you don't embrace low code, there may be a time when your career is similar to maybe a Fortran developer, but that's not to say that there won't be a job for you. There are jobs for Fortran developers. It's not like you're going to be out of a job. It's just maybe that there are less jobs available. There maybe won't be as many exciting kind of, technology or working in new industries that you've maybe options that to explore. It's easy to get threatened by something that's new, but it's just, all we have to think about it is from a pro dev perspective, is low code just being another tool that enables you to write less code. If you can write less code, that's a good thing. Irrespective of whether or not you're a citizen developer or a pro developer, writing less code is a good thing, because it's like you mentioned, there's less stuff to test and less to maintain.
Since citizen development will explode, it's exploding. It will have thousands, if not millions of people like today Excel users. Pro developers will move to one architect position. It's almost like citizen developers will be infantry and pro developers will be officers in that army. Pretty much with citizen developers, they can create a house of cards, and pro developer is the one who actually can understand from architecture point of view if it's in the right place, how it can be readdressed and reshuffled. So it's like leading rather than doing, and that's maybe another thing.
Well, yeah, certainly when you're a pro developer, you have to think about more of the complexities like security and performance and all of those kind of things, and you're building a more complicated app than just some point solution. Those things have to be understood. So if you're creating an enterprise application that's being rolled out to many thousands of people, or it's working on data that is absolutely mission critical, so I don't think necessarily that landscape is going to change that differently. I think where today we've got people who are using Excel spreadsheets or Microsoft Access databases, then those people are going to have another option to use Power Apps or low-code tools. There's going to be the potential for those people then to get more involved with software, because what you can do with Power Apps and low-code tools is a lot more than you could do with Excel spreadsheet and Access, right? So the scope for creating much more functionality, much more usable applications is greater there. But I don't think fundamentally the landscape is going to change that much, because you've still got the two different disciplines, enterprise versus point solution.
So maybe what will happen, pro developers will spend less time on building kind of nonsense applications like cleaning up, moving buttons left to the right. So you have Visual Studio, you have VS Code. What kind of other tools do you use? I know you have your test library, your test solution. I think it's called Spark. It has Spark in the name.
So I've got my own, a lot of open source tools. So obviously the Ribbon Workbench with the XRM Toolbox, many different libraries I use. So I use Dataversify, which is one of my own open source. I use Sparkle for tasks deploying. I use the Power Platform CLI. I use the M365 CLI. I use the Azure CLI. That's all installed. I use PowerShell a lot. I do a lot of stuff just from the Node, command line in terms of, running tests and things like that. I only use the Edge browser, so I'm running a Windows. I have been thinking about going over to a Mac, because I'm increasingly like the cross-platform story. And obviously, if you work on a Mac, then it forces you to be. But I haven't really made that leap yet. I use iOS devices to test as well as Android devices to test. But as far as other tools are concerned, I use Enterprise Architect, which is like a diagramming tool. It's not just diagramming, it creates like a UML model that allows you to fit things together. And that kind of gives you a good way of modeling your overall architecture and making sure it's semantically correct and it all fits together, as well as you can model database type relationships and all of those kind of things. I'm a massive fan of PowerPoint. I think PowerPoint is one of those things that if you can't summarize what you're trying to describe in a couple of PowerPoint slides, then I think, you need to simplify it further down. And I like being able to kind of explain something by building a slide up. And especially from a end user's perspective. We've got a very complicated process, but how does the user see it? We want to make sure that the user sees it in a simple way, because if it's complicated from a user's perspective, then it means you're probably going to have a lot of challenges when you deploy it. So I like building things up in PowerPoint, but from a more complex UI sort of wireframing, I use Figma. Figma basically is allows you to sort of put user interface controls onto a canvas. There's a library for an add-in which runs Fluent UI, which is the Microsoft user interface design language that's basically Office 365 and Power Platform uses. So you can make user interfaces that look very much like a kind of a native Microsoft application. And it's great because you can create interactivity inside the Figma design. You can make it so drop downs work. You click on a button and it navigates to another screen. You can highlight certain areas of the screen that are functional and the rest of it's static, so that when you run it, it's like a click through demo. It runs like a real piece of software. And again, that goes back down to the user experience. Whenever I'm looking at a software architecture, there's all these different views that are very, very important. You've got the user experience view, you've got the information architecture view, you've got the security view, you've got the technology, the Power Platform that's sitting underneath it. There's both a static element to that as well as a dynamic element to that. So it's all these tools are very much enabling me to approach a challenge of any particular piece of software from those many different view angles, and so that I make sure that I've got all elements covered, because that's really what I'm always thinking about, is like, okay, have I thought about all the different combinations and permutations of things that I'm not going to build them all, but I need to make sure I at least thought them through, and having tools that enable to, because I can't hold them all in my brain at the same time. That's, it's 7 things at one time, only remember. So, being able to put them down in a way that I can come back to them and refer to them and demonstrate to them people is very useful.
That's an interesting angle. Many developers moving from development to architecture, they might need to be aware of that. So what kind of views do you usually go through? What kind of list do you have?
Firstly, understanding the difference between a dynamic view and a static view. I think that if you're going to move from just development to more of an architectural view, I think that's very important. Modeling state transitions is an incredibly powerful way of understanding an overall architecture of software. It's very easy to kind of create a static view of tables, like relational database in Dataverse, for example. And then it's very easy then to create a user interface on top of that. But then understanding how your software works from a dynamic behavioral perspective. So, okay, it starts off in this state, and then that event then causes the state to mutate from one state to another state. And then during that, then there's another event that can only happen in that state. So I would recommend, if anybody wants to look at opening up their, to different ways of thinking about approaching software, look at event-driven architecture architectures, because I think that is a very good way of broadening your horizon about looking at the problem in a slightly different way.
I'll still go for detail. So Lemmings, you jump in the code, testing some elements, animation, for example. So you never used you have to use your MAL diagram for that.
Not for Lemmings. The only thing with Lemmings that I use is a design pattern. Okay. So when you've been writing code for a long time, there's certain design patterns that you use, and they become sort of second nature to you. So when your code is simple like that, then you just naturally use those design patterns. When you're looking at much more complex systems that have never, implemented anything like that before, although you may use design patterns as building blocks, you're making a much more complex design pattern in its entirety. So the design patterns I use for Lemmings were a game loop, which is managing state. It's like arrays of sprites, those kind of design patterns around managing indexing of certain things on a map, because it's like in a fast and efficient way. It's like if you've been writing games in a traditional way and sort of like in the olden days, everything had to be an array, and you would index things in an array rather than because that was the most efficient way of doing it. It was like a block of memory, and you had to have an index to that block of memory. You couldn't afford to have higher level object constructs that you had to get right down to just a number in memory. There we go. So there's those kind of design patterns, and so because I knew those design patterns, I could just jump in, but I would never just jump in for a more complicated system that I'd never really built or didn't understand, because it's down to business requirements.
And design patterns, can you recommend maybe a book? I know there is a very famous book, and maybe, yeah, okay. So that's the best.
That one, yes.
Yeah, so design patterns, exactly. So it's a group of authors. And the book is quite old. Do you think all of these patterns completely applicable to Power Platform? Have we invented anything new, like something unique specific for Power Platform?
I think, there's always new stuff coming out, but because it's so abstract, the design patterns themselves, they're still applicable, but some of the examples that they give are very dated. The design patterns that we have today are, if you look at them, they're kind of based around those original design patterns, except for they're abstracted a lot further away from that kind of raw, batching or batching of operations, with patch. That's really where low code comes in, is you don't have to worry about those things. You're telling the system what you want to do rather than how you want to do it. With low code programming, the patterns that we're tending to use are much more, they're declarative patterns rather than imperative patterns. And I think declarative patterns is really where the future of programming really is going to be.
So you see, it could be another book of just specific declarative patterns.
Sorry. So there's this. This is this book here by Akil Mendoza, which is Microsoft Power Apps Cookbook, like the design patterns, right? But for low code. So there are books available to do that.
There is a second technology you also been like early adopter, is PCF controls. And I know for SalesPark, you've made a lot of discoveries. I remember that kind of conversation you had. Was it the same pattern you had applied? So you were trying to prototype and try to fail early as soon as possible and trying to identify. I remember you were saying a lot of things couldn't be done early days. So my question to you, was it the same pattern you applied? And second question, do you think PCF now a really mature technology? Because if it's coming from you, it's probably true.
So with SalesPark, it was absolutely that. I was trying to prove things out. So it was about building an MVP, and that was obviously the key, the minimal viable product very early on. And in order to do that, I will always say, okay, well, these are the business requirements trying to satisfy. We're trying to do architectural synthesis. That's what I do, is that, and that's where I was talking about, building things out to try and prove stuff works. And so that architectural synthesis was, okay, we've got this new PCF framework.
Almost like using it probably next month, it was announced, almost wasn't like really early adopter.
Yeah, I've been using it in private preview when it was called like a custom control framework, CCF, and then it was sort of renamed, and kind of basically knew how it worked. And of course, back then it wasn't even available in Canvas apps. It was only in model-driven apps. And so it was like, okay, right, let's prove this out using no user interface sugar. Let's not make this look nice. It was just really basic stuff, no styling, just being able to show, okay, you can get a particular view of data. I can interact with this. I can then do what I need to do. But then also, with SalesPark, there was other stuff. There was like Azure back-end services. So it's like, okay, let's make something as small as possible, but test it in a kind of performance from a large scale fashion. So trying to prove out the limits and, how can we push Azure functions so that the absolute limit, okay, well, what kind of licensing are you going to need to enable to do what you need to do for a certain scale? So that was my approach there. And then once you'd done that, it was a case of, well, okay, now I've got a reference architecture that I broadly know works. Now let's actually build the real thing. And then it makes it a lot easier. You're not making mistakes. I find that that's the worst thing is if you're building something for real and you then have to then hack around with it and back out decisions, change stuff, you get like technical debts and you get things that are not perhaps done in the way that you really want to do. And then also writing tests as you go along, it makes it much easier because then you know what you're testing before you're actually building it, and which then means that the test process becomes a lot slicker.
I know you have a couple of courses, and that's where I was leading to you, and we will mention all of them because I definitely believe people need to go and check all your courses. My question is, how do you prepare for them? How do you put them together? Because where the world moving and especially teenagers, they're proving that everything will be online. If you don't have online presence, you virtually doesn't exist. And the question is how you can prepare, how you can put together and build your own courses. What's your approach? Because you definitely did it a few times and quite successfully.
It's one of those things that's so easy to underestimate, and I always underestimate it because I do approach it as very much the same as I would do any other project, right? I will look at real world scenarios, and it's like, okay, I don't want to teach theory. I don't want to teach stuff that you could just learn from Microsoft Docs. You can go to Microsoft Docs for that. I want to teach things that I've found work in real life, and I found that actually are things that work better than the alternative, and give us some opinions, right? So because many courses are unopinionated, I found that there are benefits over and above an alternative. If you can find other techniques that you find other benefits, well, then that's a choice that, you have to make ultimately yourself, right? So I can only offer my opinion. You don't have to take that opinion as the kind of gold standard. But nevertheless, if I am giving an opinion, I want to make sure that I can stand by that opinion. And I think that's really where, and my YouTube videos are the same. I don't give things out lightly if I don't know that that's something that really is actually going to be a viable approach for someone. And so, yeah, when I'm preparing, that's really why it takes so long, is that I have to go through all of those different scenarios.
So your preparation routine, how does it look like? Do you do some kind of flashcards, talk different topics?
Oh, no. I will always I have like very high level topics that I will talk about. And then it's just like, right, okay, I'm now going to talk about it and I'm going to try and teach it. Okay, because there's a difference between it's a sort of the knowledge and teaching, right? It's like, okay, I want to be able to explain something and I want to be able to impart my experience rather than just reading out something, which you could read from a book.
I think you're bringing fun to it. Yeah, you're bringing some fun to it. I remember in Ireland, that conference, I remember first 10 minutes, people were just laughing.
When I say power, you say effects. Power. Effects. Power. Effects.
So you just, I remember you put together, I don't remember what was it. I think you were putting some buttons and making them colorful and play around and make almost jokes. Spend 10 minutes almost breaking that kind of ice. So definitely that kind of angle. And I was curious what kind of routine, what can you share in terms of preparation, delivering a good course, delivering a good event?
Yeah, well, certainly course is very different to doing a speaking event. I think as a course, you've got an audience which they're captive in the sense that they've come there specific to learn something, and they're probably going to go back and watch something repeatedly and refer and pause it and refer to it. Whereas an event, you have to engage with someone to really get someone's attention. And if I watch someone speaking, I have a very wandering mind. I'll always go off, start thinking about something else. So if I'm not careful, I have to really concentrate to keep my focus on something unless there's something to capture my attention. And so I tend to think about, if I was listening to myself, would I be interested in listening to myself? Which is, yeah, sometimes it's a kind of a high barrier to meet because, I am easily distracted. But yeah, it's nice to have a bit of fun at these events, especially we've got an in-person event.
I think fun and education is probably the best companion. And what I was amazed, some of my friends were doing British university. I finished in my country, in Moldova. But what they were saying, and they had the recording, is actually almost like kind of stand-up comedians. And it's very different to the way how I'm used to see my teachers, and they were just reading from a list or whatever. And I guess it's kind of Britishness in there, what they're doing. Before we wrap up, and we have, I usually have like a blitz, a quick fire of questions. I want you to tell a story. What's unique about Canada? You're chopping your own trees for Christmas, and we're recording these guys actually in Christmas time. So how does it work? You just go to your neighbor and you see a tree you like and just chop it off and put it in your house?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I've got a map here which shows you all of the areas you can chop trees, because we did chop a tree. We actually went and got our Christmas tree at the weekend, and so the forestry gives you a list. And so where you've got power lines that go across the mountains, because where we are here is there's a big mountain behind us. So you've got these huge power lines going over the mountains. And so they have to keep all of those areas below the power lines clear of trees for obvious reasons. So you're allowed to go into that area and chop down any trees you like. And then off any other logging roads where you've got, you're allowed to sort of go with sort of 14 meters either side in some areas and pick up trees. So yeah, we went up there and it was very snowy. So we had to take the 4-wheel drive vehicle and try not to get stuck. And my daughter decided, right, she picked the one. She was like, I like that one. She went in there and I gave her, she sawed it, chopped it down, dragged it out.
So it's like 3-4 meters. It's not like 1 meter. It's like not 10 meters. How tall is, I'm trying to joke, how tall is it usually?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's about sort of like, I don't know, 9 feet tall.
Wow.
And it looked smaller than it was when we picked it up, so we did have to take off about 2 feet from the bottom when we got home. But it always does, but we've got quite tall ceilings where we are. So
when do you do you have the tree in house today, or you do it in a few days before Christmas? Oh, you have it?
Yeah, we got it last weekend, and it was sort of, beginning of December, we generally decorate everything.
Yeah, actually in the region we're watching, I think this will go live after New Year. So we're celebrating actually Orthodox Christmas. So it's happening on January 7th. So the fun, actually, I know on Western Hemisphere, the fun ends with New Year. In our case, it begins with New Year. So we usually don't have trees. And for me, it's actually good stuff. Usually in the UK, trees are going on sale just because the end of Christmas time. It's perfect time when I buy it, put it in the house. So are you looking for Christmas? Are you going to celebrate it in any specific way this year? Anything funky?
We're going to have, family over, which is quite nice. My wife's not working on Christmas Day, which is quite nice, which is through she was planning, there was on schedule to work on Christmas Day, but now she's not, thank you, which is great. So yeah, that's going to be really good. And yeah, we'll have family over, probably eat too much, and then have turkey sandwiches, the kind of the all the kind of things that you do. The Christmas Day is quite traditionally similar in Canada as it is in the UK, and it will be nice to see my oldest son, because he's been away at university for the last term, so he's flying back. And
so I think we probably can wrap up, because we have a full hour and I want to exhaust you and actually our audience. They probably might get exhausted as well. So I have a quick fire of questions, like quick blitz. Blogging or speaking?
Speaking.
So YouTube or LinkedIn?
YouTube now, I'm finding.
Yeah, best question for Scott Durow. Managed or unmanaged?
Oh, definitely managed. I couldn't say anything else.
Even in the test environment, even in development environment. I think this question's still not settled. Andrew Butenko, I did an interview with him a couple of weeks ago, and he told definitely unmanaged. And so what's your take, if you can expand slightly? Why managed?
Well, managed when you're deploying it, right? So, the analogy is unmanaged is an open box. So when you're still putting things in the box and you're still, designing it, then that's open, that's an unmanaged. And when you close the box to then deploy it to other environments, that's a managed solution. So yes, definitely open box in your development environment, because you're still putting stuff and taking stuff out, but then close box when you move it into downstream environments.
And if you need to do some kind of patches, updates, you still always do managed?
I don't use patches at all.
Whatever production environment which touches your hands, it's always managed. No one will find unmanaged in your environments. That's huge.
There's benefits, obviously, with unmanaged, which you can see, but I think in general, the benefits of managed outweigh any of the benefits of using unmanaged.
So guys, put me a few questions which probably is a little less relevant, but I'll try them. St. Patrick's Day or Christmas? People think that Ireland and UK is the same, but still. So what do you think? St. Patrick's Day or Christmas?
I would have to say Christmas, but I do love St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, I'm very fond of Guinness.
I'm the same, and I think the best Guinness you can get actually in Ireland, it's up on the factory. It's actually not bitter. Did you do this tour on the Guinness factory?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
everything I liked it by the fact that I realized how many pipes they had. So I realized I probably leaked every single pipe going there because effective way it goes through, and it looks like effective. So you see that all your drink which come into you will go through all this pipe. So MVP or non-MVP?
Oh, goodness. Well, I love being an MVP. I think it's a real privilege. So I would have to say MVP. Otherwise, maybe they'll take it away from me. But I think, MVP shouldn't be something that is held on this kind of huge pedestal that is something that's amazingly, it's just being an MVP doesn't automatically suddenly make you kind of knowledgeable about everything. I certainly would say I never have all the answers. I'm just like anybody else. It's just that I've been recognized for some of my community contributions, and that gives me some certain privileges in terms of being able to talk to other MVPs in a more of a direct way, which is nice, and also, as going to things like Summit and being able to talk to the product team.
So Dynamics or Power Platform?
Power Platform. Absolutely, all the way. I think Dynamics they're fantastic apps, but of course they're built on the Power Platform. So I think fundamentally the Power Platform would be where I would start.
I have the final question. It's about Ribbon Workbench. So Ribbon Workbench or modern commanding?
I would say if you can do it with modern commanding, do it with modern commanding, and that's my approach. So I'll always say, okay, right, can I build this using a PowerFX expression? Great. Okay, if I can't, can I do it using a JavaScript expression using modern commanding? Fantastic. If you can't, then you fall back to the classic, which is obviously the Ribbon Workbench. And there are sometimes that it just makes sense to do that. Like if you want to hide something that's out of the box, or if you want to customize something that's out of the box, or if you want to do something with a enable rule that needs to call JavaScript to make it hidden or shown based on some kind of custom JavaScript, those are the sort of things you need to use the Ribbon Workbench. So I find myself using the Ribbon Workbench an awful lot still because of the limitations that still are in modern commanding. But over time, those things will be unblocked by modern commanding. So at some point in the future, I would think that the use of the Ribbon Workbench will gradually start to go down. But at the moment, it's if you look at the telemetry I get from people using it, I don't see any reduction in people using it.
So by the way, about the Ribbon Workbench, are you still investing your time in it? Do you still develop anything, or you just use it as it is?
It's funny you mentioned that because I'm actually doing an update to push out a version later this week. So I still do things. I do, I test things. I mean, it's been very stable for certainly the last 8-9 months because there's no changes that I've needed to make. Smart buttons are an add-on to it, so you can install those as a separate version. Versioning. It's a separate solution. I don't need to rev the Ribbon Workbench solution to rev the smart buttons, which is that's probably where I put more effort in.
What we're not talking about, we need to talk in Power Platform environment in our industry dynamics world.
I would say custom pages and how they can be used more. Being able to make use of custom pages with the PowerFX and how that can then be built into solutions, and how you can use custom pages to replace sort of maybe legacy web resources, those kind of things. Anything that's got any traditional HTML web resources, how can you replace that with custom pages? That's probably something that you need to start looking at now. If you've got HTML web resources, look at the opportunities you've got to use a custom page and so you can get rid of them.
Are you going to build a course for custom page?
Maybe I should. I've considered, just doing full-time training. I mean, that's one of the things I do enjoy it. It's just, that's quite a big decision to do, to, kind of move into.
Yeah. So how people, our audience, how they can find you, what the best way of following you, which channels do you actually support and invest your time in?
Yeah, so follow me on Twitter, please, at Scott Durow, and on YouTube. I would really appreciate any subscriptions to my YouTube channel, which is just, youtube.com/Scott Durow. I upload regular videos, and especially around the kind of the low code, as you've mentioned. That's not to say it's only going to be low code ever. I mean, I have got some pro code videos planned as well. So I will always be doing that. It's not like I'm going to suddenly only be doing low code stuff, because I very much like the pro code, the C# with the JavaScript, TypeScript stuff as well. I like getting down with that.
I don't believe you would ever stop, because if Scott Durow stops developing code, then probably platform is dying. Probably it will be the first sign something happening there. So you know what? I think I managed to answer just 20% of questions I had. So we definitely have material for another session. I really appreciate being on our channel and accepting the invitation. Definitely, I'm looking forward to have next one with you, maybe in some time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been my absolute pleasure. And thank you for having me. It's been really enjoyable. And the questions you've been asking are are really on the money, as they say, really current and very important things to be thinking about. So thank you.
So follow Sarov Plus, follow Scott Durow YouTube channel, and stay in touch. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.